To start, I'm one of the doctors here. You probably all know a lot of that stuff, so I'm going to cruise through this. We've published a fair amount with sub-investigators on the largest stem cell study looking at stem cells in the knee, lead investigators on the largest stem cell study looking at stem cells in the lumbar spine, and we're working on the two largest studies for shoulders and hips in stem cells now. Hopefully we'll have those published by the end of this year, sort of the goal. Standard in medical talks to talk about conflicts of interest. We don't take money from any industry sources. We have no conflicts of interest other than that we're in practice here. So without ado, peptides. So to get into peptides, I chose to start where most of us probably have familiarity, which is louder. I chose to start where most of us have familiarity, which is with proteins and amino acids. And I think most of us are familiar with proteins through nutrition and diet, and proteins are made up of amino acids. So amino acids are the molecule that you stack together to make the larger protein molecule. Proteins are very important physiologic molecules in our bodies. They serve important structural functions like hair, nails, muscle are all made out of protein. But proteins also play important roles in the form of proteins that serve function as receptors, hormones, neurotransmitters. And so the point being, we're all familiar with proteins. Proteins are important to our body. And why do I start there is that peptides are really just small proteins. So it's a term that people use to talk about proteins that are 50 amino acids or smaller. 51 amino acids or more stacked together is a protein, and 50 or less is generally a peptide. And so you'll hear people who will use this term kind of interchangeably. We'll talk about proteins as peptides, we'll talk about peptides as proteins, but really a peptide is just a small protein. And so when we talk about peptides for therapy, all we're really saying is we're using proteins for therapy. And when we talk about peptide therapy, I guess I tell my clients, you really could just say medication. It's protein or protein medication. They're peptides for all different sorts of medical issues that can be used therapeutically. So peptide, when we say peptide, we're really just talking about a protein medication. Really pretty, I think, simple, I hope. Any sort of questions or thoughts around that? Great. So most of the peptides that we use medically are naturally occurring, meaning that your body already produced them. So the same way that, we're familiar with supplements like vitamin C, vitamin D as things that are naturally occurring in our body, most of the peptides that we use for therapy are things that our body already produce or something very close to it. And so the peptides that we're going to kind of talk about are the ones that, or that I have ready to talk about tonight, are these, which are some of the most commonly used peptides, not just in regenerative medicine, but also in traditional medicine. And so I list this out up front because it can get a little monotonous sort of running through each one of these. And I was curious if any of you had any specific peptides that you wanted to hear about. We can go through all these, but if there's any interest in any one in particular, we can focus on those. So anybody have a specific peptide they were interested in? And if not, that's okay.
Tesamorelin.
The tesamorelin, yeah. Okay, good.
Like Motsi and like
Okay, yeah. So I don't have those slides in this deck, but we can hit on those. Any others? So the reason why I have these in different colors, the blue peptides are FDA approved. The ones that are black are not FDA approved. And so we'll get into what that distinction is and why that is a little bit later, but just to sort of delineate those. So tesamorelin, we'll get to that. I'll start with BPC just because that's sort of the most common one that people use and are familiar with. So BPC was initially identified and published in the scientific literature in the early 90s. These were Croatian researchers who were looking for naturally occurring molecules that could help and have some sort of health indication, meaning could be used for disease or protection of tissues in some way. When they found it, they originally, in this original paper, they called it an organoprotector. And the reason was because pretty much every system that they looked at BPC in, it seemed to have a healing effect. So it has healing effects all over the body that has since been confirmed in multiple different studies, both in humans and animals, and thus it's been given the name body protection compound because it seems to protect almost every tissue that it's been looked at in. So BPC stands for body protection compound. 157 seems to come from, it's a 15 amino acid chain. The 7, it's not clear to me where the 7 comes from, but that's what it's commonly called, BPC 157. So it's been studied in both humans and animals. It's been shown to have protective properties in bone, ligament, tendon, skeletal muscle, in nervous and brain tissue, both peripherally and centrally, and also in sexual function. So it's something that has sort of broad-reaching healing capacity, and it's not FDA approved. We typically use it for, not just us, but in general, for healing injury. And so a lot of people online or on social media will call it the Wolverine peptide, as in sort of the superhero Wolverine, because it helps people heal a lot more quickly. It's often noticeable when people have injuries, when they start using it, that they notice an accelerated healing rate relative to what they had experienced before using it. It also has pretty good utility in gut health, specifically for irritable bowel and leaky gut. It's got a very good track record at healing those issues. It's also been studied in eye and corneal injury, has benefited accelerating healing to eye injury. It's been researched and looked at in concussion and traumatic brain injury, and has been shown to have benefit in small human studies in those areas. And it also has independent anti-inflammatory action. So it's kind of a laundry list of things that it's been looked at in. We tend to use it mainly for injury healing, gut indications, and around stem cell procedures and healing from surgery. So I put these in here for a few of these peptides, which is that even though it's naturally occurring, and even though it's something that's in your body naturally, any medical therapy has potential side effects and downsides. So nothing is risk-free. The most common thing that people report when they take not just BPC, but any peptide, is some redness at the site of where it's administered. So you're putting a peptide or a protein into your body. And I guess an important thing to note is that when I talk about peptides, I'm assuming that we're using or delivering those peptides as an injection. The reason for that is when you take a protein or peptide in orally, your body digests it naturally. So if you want to have an effect on a tissue like a bone or a ligament or the eye or the brain, and you take it orally, you take the protein orally, it's going to get digested and broken down into its complement amino acids, and the tissue where you want the effect isn't going to see the benefit of that protein. So to skip that digestive process, administering it as an injection allows your body to be exposed to that protein before it's broken down. So injecting these, the most common reaction that people will report is you get a little histamine release around it. So a little redness, a little itchiness, about the size of a nickel or a quarter can happen. It's not an allergic reaction. It's just a reaction to a protein being introduced to your body. And so it's a common side effect with peptide injections. Even though it's naturally occurring, when we use them as therapies, they're synthetically created in a lab. And so there are rare reports of allergic reactions. That's true with any medication. BPC in particular, when it's been tracked over long term, some people have alterations in their kidney function and their liver enzymes. This is why it's important to have somebody who knows what they're doing helping you with these things. Dizziness and blood pressure alterations have also been reported in the literature, although what I would say is that for BPC and all of the peptides that we use that are naturally occurring, the vast majority of people don't have any side effects. I put dosing in here, although I don't think that's so important for our purposes. And then we're going to launch into the next peptide. Any questions about BPC? Yeah.
Why are those not FDA approved yet?
So great question. So this gets into, and a lot of people get confused. They're like, well, how can you use a medication that's not FDA approved? We'll get into that into the right, so in the right context, in the right way, that's actually still legal to do under a current regulatory framework. And I'll explain why when we get to the regulations portion. To run a drug through an FDA approval process, phase 1 through 3, and then ultimately 4, is an incredibly involved and expensive process. In general, nobody's interested in investing the kind of time and energy and money into that unless it's something that they can patent protect. So naturally occurring molecules, by definition, are not supposed to be patented. You have to alter the molecule into its non-original form for it to be able to be patented. So some common examples, like the antacid medications, Protonix, Nexium, Prilosec, the statins like atorvastatin, Crestor, Lipitor, Mevacor, Zocor. Those are all things that were derived from a naturally occurring molecule, meaning Big Pharma is notorious for like finding all the spider venom in the world and looking at it for novel molecules and seeing what kind of effects those naturally occurring molecules might have. But to be able to patent it, they actually have to alter that molecule and alter it in a way that it creates a new compound which can be patented. So fundamentally, when you have a protein, which is a string of amino acids, by adding a new amino acid, you've now created a new peptide. And often with peptides, it totally changes the function. So it's very difficult to have a patentable peptide. You have to have a peptide that you can alter to create something new, and then have it still serve the function that the original molecule was found to do. So peptides, the short story is, it's very difficult to patent a peptide. And if you can't patent it, there's almost nobody who's going to invest the time and resources into running it through the trials. I don't know. Hopefully I didn't get too involved there, but that's,
Makes sense, but thank you.
yeah. And I think that's a theme in general when you look at traditional medicine versus functional or regenerative medicine. Functional medicine tries to take a root cause, more natural approach, at least as a first step. And often that involves using naturally occurring molecules like supplements or peptides before going to a novel molecule or patented molecule, which we do. We prescribe regular medications all the time. We're traditionally trained, all of us, both as physicians, nurse practitioners, and nurses. But in general, the approach is to try to take a root cause, less invasive mode of therapy rather than a novel or more invasive. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Just the difference between knowing that BPC 157 is more typically used for injury that then is injected at the site of injury or
So,
the area typically?
So everybody's a little different. I mean, what I tell people is, like if I'm using it because my low back's hurting, I try to put it in there. It's gonna be put it in close to the area where I want to have the effect. The reality is it's gonna be absorbed systemically, and it's gonna end up going all over the body through the circulation. But the idea that, if you have a knee injury and you want the highest concentration around the knee, it's not going to hurt to get it subcutaneously around the knee. That doesn't mean you want to get it in the knee or try to get it in the joint, but put it in, right under the skin around that area. Totally reasonable to do that.
So then the effects don't really change as far as like subcutaneous.
What I would say is that medically, scientifically, it shouldn't. Whether you're injecting it here in the abdomen or in the shoulder and the delt versus right at the area if you're have an ankle injury trying to get in the ankle. Shouldn't make a difference, but it doesn't hurt to get it closer.
Gotcha.
And
Yes.
why do such small quantities of it have such a big effect?
Well, I mean, and this is unique to each, so this is true for medications as well. Different medications have different half-lives, they have different affinities or binding ability to the receptors, to the tissues where you're trying to have the effect. And so this is not unique to peptides. Some peptides are more potent and effective at lower doses, while others at higher doses. And there are definitely dose-related effects with particular peptides. So that, I would say, is more unique to the individual molecule rather than the class of therapy, meaning you have the same types of effect with any medication, whether it's protein medication or an inorganic medication. And you have similar effects with biologics. So we know with stem cells, there is a dose effect. If you get the right number of cells to the right place, you're more likely to get a better effect. So that's individual to the specific peptide and the specific medication. And so, I don't know, it's a little vague, but it's individual per medication. And then,
So you kind of answered it from his question, but I'll change it. When taken in capsule form for gut dysbiosis, SIBO, LIBO, are you seeing results from post and pre-stool tests as well?
absolutely, you can. Although I would say, in my experience with my clients, I tend to see better experience with injected BPC than with oral, even when you're using it for gut indication. And I don't know if you guys have any, thoughts or experience with that you'd like to weigh in on.
I would agree with that. I prescribe both the oral form, and I tend to do that more frequently with GI ailments. And the reasoning from the pharmacy is, hey, we package it such that it's going to be protected against the gastric enzyme, so it should make it to where it's needed, like the colon, small intestine. But I would say, yeah, in terms of results, the more profound positive results, even for GI ailments, come from the injectable, the subcutaneous BPC than oral.
Great. I'll go through thymosin beta-4 because it's one of the second most commonly used peptides. It was also, identified in the last century, 1970s. It's naturally occurring. It's well known because it helps promote cell proliferation, which means it helps promote cell division and growth. And that's what makes it such a great healing molecule. It also helps slow down cell death or programmed cell death, which is what we call apoptosis, is a scientific term for that. It also is known to reduce inflammation and has been studied, most widely in humans in myocardial infarction or in heart attacks. So there's a number of human studies. Most of these are relatively small, medically speaking, 50 people, around 50 or 60-ish people. But it has good benefit in so if you have a heart attack, thymosin beta-4 is a good one to take to help preserve the myocardium. There's multiple studies that show that that's the case. Again, it's not FDA approved. We kind of went over why that might be the case. Unfortunately, what this sort of non-FDA approval means is that almost nobody's ever heard of these things unless you're in a practice like this, and very few people actually get the utility of the benefit of these therapies. So just from one of the scientific literature, thymosin beta-4 works through both cell surface receptors, intracellular binding, and at the nucleus to have multiple effects, including blood vessel growth, which is an important part of injury healing, cell growth, immune. The thymosin comes from at least it was first identified in a thymus fraction. The thymus gland is thought to be part of the immune system, and it serves a role as an immune regulator, but it also helps with cell survival. So it has broad-ranging regenerative capacity. We tend to use it often paired with BPC together for injury healing and around postoperative repair and recovery. It's been studied most widely in humans in cardiac protection post-heart attack, And it's also been studied in humans for autoimmune processes. You know, autoimmune processes, you have the immune system attacking one of your tissues, that creates tissue damage. This helps promote healing in the damaged tissue. It's also been studied in the nervous system and shown both in humans and in vitro, so in a test tube, to help neurons heal and recover. It's also been studied for hair restoration. So important thing about thymosin beta-4 is that there are a couple of mechanisms here that if this is not used properly, have been shown to be associated with the disease process. So particularly when you talk about inhibiting cell death, growing blood vessels, and enhancing cell survival, this is the kind of thing you don't want to use in somebody who's got cancer. And in fact, thymosin beta-4 has been shown in some bench research to be associated with metastatic processes. Now, I know that can sound really scary, but there are a lot of things that we use therapeutically, like multiple growth factors, matrix metalloproteases. These are all things that are super important for tissue healing and repair in injury, that if that process gets dysregulated, can be associated with the disease process. And so I'm just not trying to fearmonger, but to tell people, like, even though it's naturally occurring, doesn't mean that it's risk-free, and it needs to be used appropriately and wisely. It needs to be monitored appropriately. So again, dosing here, not so important, but then that takes us into our next peptide, which is a different thymosin. So I'll pause there again. Any thoughts, questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Like stacking BPC and TB500 is, what time frame are you seeing people having to take it for sports injuries or other injuries?
I would say everybody's different, and we tend to use, so I personally, I guess I'll speak personally, because I know other people might use it differently, even though we're in practice together. For acute injury, I tend to do a minimum of about a month, although you don't have to do a full month. So, I have BPC and thymosin beta-4 sitting in a vial in my fridge, and when I tweak my back doing jujitsu or tweak my ankle, I'll just take it for a week, 10 days. You don't have to do a full month course. For larger injuries, so particularly around like major surgeries, and you're trying to enhance recovery and healing and rehabilitation from that, you can do longer courses, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. It's highly dependent on the person, the reason why you're using it. So, and he mentioned TB500, so there's sort of a common lingo. Thymosin beta-4 is also commonly referred to as Thompson beta-500, is sort of a common term. It's the same way of saying like Tylenol and acetaminophen. People commonly know what Tylenol is. You say acetaminophen, nobody knows what you're talking about. You say thymosin beta-4, everybody's like, I don't know what that is. People who are in the space, you say Thompson beta-500, they kind of know it's thymosin beta-4. So it's just different sort of term for the same peptide. I guess I'll go into thymosin alpha-1 because it's sort of, I think, one of the top 3 peptides that we used. Identified in the 70s, naturally occurring and produced in the thymus gland. It's widely recognized for its immune-enhancing properties, really to summarize it up. It's an immune modulator. This is the first one that's actually FDA approved. So this is FDA approved for 2 indications. One is for viral hepatitis, both hepatitis B and C, particularly in combination with interferon treatment, and then as an immune enhancer as part of cancer treatment, usually some form of chemo or radiation therapy. This is an orphan drug, meaning it is FDA approved. It has a trade name, Zidaxin. If I write you a script for this and you go to a commercial pharmacy, you can't get this medication. Nobody's commercially producing it because there isn't enough demand for it, and therefore it's produced and not used largely. And so even though it's FDA approved, you can't get this unless you have a compounder make it for you. So just another graphic from the literature that shows sort of the wide-reaching possibilities for an immune enhancer. It could be used in bacterial illness, it could be used in viral illness. It's beneficial in mold people who suffer from mold toxicity. It's beneficial. It's one of the reasons that traditional medicine uses it. It's a vaccine adjuvant, or that's a term that we use to say, like, when you're giving a vaccine, it helps the immune system handle the vaccine and do what we want the vaccine to do. And so it can be paired with a vaccine to help enhance the immune system function. I've personally used it a lot in people who suffer from post-COVID syndrome or COVID long hauler syndrome, because that's usually, there's some form of immune dysregulation, in my opinion, around what's going on in long COVID syndrome. So it's got anything that the immune system is involved with, and anything that enhanced immune function would benefit from. Thymosin alpha-1 is a good peptide to consider in that sort of scenario. Again, so I put this one in here again because in the FDA, in the phase 3 trial, it's the only drug that I know of that had more side effects in the placebo group than the thymosin alpha-1 group. No, seriously. So it's actually one of, like, the best tolerated medications ever to go through the FDA approval process. But even with that, there's still, side effects that can happen. Redness at the injection site, which we covered with BPC. In rare cases, some people have suffered with muscle atrophy. This is long-term use. Some people have had LFT enzyme elevation, so these are elevation in their liver enzymes. This is a common complication from really any medication, and rare reports of joint aches and swelling. So again, not trying to scare you away from peptides, but just trying to, reiterate the point that they're naturally occurring, your body's making this normally. Even though that's happening, you could still have side effects from any medication. So this brings us to CJC 1295. I might run through this one because I don't want to just bore you, unless, is there interest in CJC 1295? Yeah, okay. So CJC 1295, first identified in 2006, at least first published. People were looking for, the scientists were looking for a treatment that would enhance growth hormone, particularly in children who suffer from growth that's not optimal. And so there's synthetic growth hormone. Synthetic growth hormone is not ideal for a variety of different reasons. We could get into that, but the main one that I would bring up, because it's easy to talk about, is that synthetic growth hormone doesn't follow your natural circadian rhythm. Growth hormone is released in a very specific way, impulses. It varies widely over the course of the day, meaning some parts of the day you have large amounts of growth hormone release, and at other times very low. And when you use a synthetic, you inject it, and you get a very sort of steady state drug cycle that is repeated with every dose administration. So trying to find a more natural alternative to synthetic growth hormone, they took the growth hormone releasing hormone, which is the thing that the hypothalamus releases and tells the pituitary. It's really the signal that the brain releases to the pituitary. It says, release more growth hormone. So they took that hormone and they added an extra amino acid group to it, and they tested it, and they found that by adding lysine to the naturally occurring GHRH, that you got significantly longer half-life and significantly improved growth hormone release that follows the natural circadian rhythm. So CJC 1295 is sometimes referred to as CJC 1295 DAC. What DAC refers to is really just this lysine group. So that original study looked at it in humans, believe it or not. It was double-blinded, it was placebo-controlled, and really, it was a small study. It was about 26 people, but they basically showed we got what we were looking for. We got a significant increase in the half-life of the GHRH. We got significantly improved growth hormone release. It looks like it's very safe and well tolerated, at least by all 26 people for the duration that they were followed. It's not, however, FDA approved. From that study, actually this is a subsequent study, but early on, we're just showing that GHRH usually lasts, the naturally occurring hormone that they were trying to mimic, lasts minutes. So it's released and it's degraded and gone. This lasts for days, and these are just different doses showing that you give a higher dose, you get higher higher serum concentrations for longer. And associated with that is significantly increased growth hormone release. So CJC 1295, we usually use it for injury healing, but anything that would benefit from more growth hormone, including sleep, tends to get enhanced. So injury recovery, people usually sleep better when they take this. It's good. It's a good sort of redistributor, helping you to burn fat and build lean muscle. So we use it for all these indications, and then for injury healing around surgery. It's also, I added this in here because I didn't know this until I was doing the research for the talk. It's been shown to decrease apolipoprotein A1 levels as well. So one of the few peptides that I know that does that. I don't know, maybe you knew that, I didn't. But this takes us to ghrelins, and so this is the class that tesamorelin is in. So I'll go through this one pretty quickly. CJC 1295 is usually paired with a ghrelin, and there's a bunch of different ghrelins. These are growth hormone, these are peptides that stimulate not just release of growth hormone, but production of growth hormone as well. So the last one just enhanced the release. These enhance both the release and the production. These are a couple of different terms that people will refer to them by, so I just threw them up there so you'd be familiar with them. There are many different ghrelins, two of which are FDA approved, sermorelin and tesamorelin. There are many ghrelins that have not been run through an FDA approval process. These are sort of broadly how people tend to think about them. There's certain groups of ghrelins. So growth retardation, studied and approved for use in children and or adults who are suffering from diminished growth because of low growth hormone levels. Sermorelin is approved for redistribution of body fat, so basically to help you eliminate body fat. Particular disease states, people put on body fat in ways that might seem unnatural. So like adrenal compromise states, people put on fat on their shoulders. In certain HIV states, people put fat on their bodies in ways that we normally aren't used to seeing people put on fat, and so that's where these ghrelins have been approved. And then some ghrelins are associated with improved GI function, particularly improved motility. So they're frequently used together. I kind of covered this, that CJC lasts longer in your system than the natural analog, but it helps promote release. Ghrelins help promote production. So you help your body make more growth hormone, and then you help it release it on its natural schedule. The two together don't affect other hormones, and they work better over a longer period of time to enhance natural growth hormone production and secretion that follows your circadian rhythm. So hopefully that kind of covers that. I'm going to kind of run through these because I know I'm kind of going a little long. DSIP is really a protein that helps enhance sleep. It's not FDA approved, but it helps improve not only deep sleep, but REM sleep, as well as alertness the day after its use. So it's an alternative for some of the, ADHD, potentially ADHD medications. GHKCU I put in here because it's naturally occurring, but it's in a lot of cosmetics. It helps enhance elastin, collagen production, gives skin and hair better reproductive capacity, and it helps minimize free radical damage. So you'll see it in a lot of cosmetics. It's also not FDA approved. We use it for hair, skin, and really any injury healing can benefit from GHKCU. And then finally, semaglutide. This is, Ozempic, or it's been in the news. These have been in the news recently because they're effective at promoting weight loss, even though they're originally approved for lowering blood sugar in diabetics. like some other medications, they've been found to enhance weight loss. Semaglutide itself is FDA approved for those indications. And I threw this in here just to show that some peptides can be augmented. The way they got this patent protection is they changed these 3 amino acids, and still, now GLP-1 proteins are naturally occurring in your body, but with a different amino acid sequence at those 3 positions. So Novo Nordisk was able to tweak that molecule, make it something new, which therefore could be patented, and now can be marketed as both a diabetic and a weight loss medication. This gets us into regulations. So I guess I'll pause there. Any thoughts, questions? Just ran through a bunch of peptides, but yes, Rudy.
You mentioned fat reduction. I've always been confused of when the fat reduction occurs, are there less fat cells or do the fat cells just shrink?
The fat cells shrink.
I see.
Yeah, you got it right.
Okay.
Good. Yes.
The GI discomfort that can sometimes happen with semaglutide, do you stack it with another peptide?
I don't typically, because at least in my experience, and usually the doses that I'm using it, particularly with my clients, if they get that tends to, we're using such low doses. So for example, the doses that we typically, or I typically use semaglutide or other GLP-1 analogs for, we're using at a much lower dose than what the FDA indication is. So people are taking those particular peptides prescribed by their endocrinologist, meaning their diabetes doctor, or their cardiologist, because there is cardiovascular and stroke benefit in diabetics with those medications at 5 to 6 times the doses that our patients are typically taking them. So those side effects, if people get them, are usually short-lived, and as their body sort of adjusts, resolve. And so I typically don't need to end up treating those GI effects with something else, but I don't know if you have similar or different.
Typically with peptides, the side effects, if you're going to have any side effects, and Voss has done a great job of kind of outlining them, they tend to be front heavy. So when you start the peptide, they tend to be sort of front and center, if you're going to experience them at all. Now with semaglutide, the rate at which nausea, vomiting, diarrhea occurs is slightly higher than most other medications. And I think the last research that I read on that, it was around 10% of individuals experience nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. But to Voss's point, you can avoid the side effects by reducing the dosage from, I think in that study, it was 2.5 milligrams
Yeah.
in the study.
2 or 3.
And I very commonly prescribe like 0.1, maybe 0.5 at the highest milligrams, in that you tend to get the benefits without risking the side effects. Now in that same study that Voss was citing by Novo Nordisk, the average weight loss over the course of 6 months was 20% of body weight. Most of our patients aren't looking to lose 20% of body weight. They're, it's just a few pounds here and there. And so the lower dosage really hits that sweet spot by avoiding the side effects and losing the amount of fat that they're looking to lose. So, but yeah, usually when my patients start experiencing side effects, they tend to be more severe, the nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And so it's not uncommon for me to just stop that semaglutide entirely. I don't know if you're going to cover this or not, but now there's another alternative to semaglutide.
I'm not, but yeah. So it's good you mention it. Yeah.
And I think the manufacturer is Eli Lilly, so somebody else got into the game, changed a couple other amino acids. Yeah, Manjaro is the brand name. Tirzepatide is the common name, and supposedly the side effects are fewer and the weight loss is greater. At least that's the way it's being marketed, and their self-published study seems to support that. But again, most of our patients aren't looking to lose 20% of body weight, so you just reduce the dose, and if semaglutide isn't working, now I have a lower threshold for just switching them over to this other peptide. So.
Yeah. Did you have a question,
I was
Will?
just going
or-
to ask about the deep sleep versus
Yeah.
CJC.
Yeah.
Given that CJC has the improved sleep, is that
Yeah.
something that you could stack? Or
absolutely.
Would they be,
Yep.
is there,
I usually don't. I usually start with one.
start with one?
And it depends, like, because CJC, eh, we use it for injury recovery, longevity purposes. So it depends on sort of what else is going on with the patient. Like if it's really just truly a sleep issue, and there's no, and they're young and longevity and injury recovery isn't an issue, DSIP is a good option. Whereas if you could get additional benefit from the other actions of the peptide, you could start with CJC. So it just depends on the scenario. Great. So regulations. I mean, I know I just spent time talking about like what a peptide is, but the regulations that apply to the peptide really stem from two things. Like does the market consider the peptide? So when I say like what are peptides, it's what does the market consider them, meaning the people who are looking at these things, and two, how are they marketed? And so what do I mean? If you're making a dietary supplement for oral use, meaning BPC 157 in a capsule, that you could market as a dietary supplement, that is not something that needs to go through an FDA approval process. Supplements do not require FDA approval. It's naturally occurring. It's being taken orally. The FDA or the FTC might step in if there's a significant issue, like if there's a problem, if somebody's making false claims. False claims falls under the Federal Trade Commission. Bad side effects or untoward medical events falls under the FDA. So they could step in, but if you're marketing a peptide as a supplement, it's not considered a medication. If they're a cosmetic, same rules apply. Much lower barrier to entry to get it into the market. You could put it in a cream, you could put it in topical, you could put it in something, a serum that's applied to the face, and there's no requirement for either FDA approval or any kind of FTC regulatory action unless there's false claims associated with it or really bad side effects or untoward medical events. So this is what I mean by what is the peptide, what is it being marketed as, and then finally, is it a medication? So if you have a peptide that you want to market as a medication, that is supposed to go through an FDA approval process. Okay? If you have a peptide that's not being marketed as a medication and isn't being broadly broadcasted to the population as a medication, there are ways around this sort of FDA approval process for medications. And that might sound sort of untoward, but there's a reason for that, and we're going to get into that. And that's sort of what are compounders and what purpose do they serve in our society. And so compounding pharmacies are pharmacies where they actually on-site can make specific formulations for specific patients for specific indications when the physician feels the patient will benefit. So a really good example is this. Benadryl is mass produced, usually with a red coat. So you go buy Benadryl, whether it's at Costco or Walgreens, you get the generic, you get the brand name, it's red. But what happened, now Benadryl is also an allergy medication. And what happens if you have an anaphylactic allergy to the red number whatever that's in that red coating? And you can't take that medicine, but you need it for the allergy, which you actually need medical treatment for. The answer is a physician or a nurse practitioner can go to a compounder and say, hey, listen, I need diphenhydramine compounded in a way without the additives that most of these commercial products have in them, because my specific patient has a medical need for this specific compound formulated in a specific way. Those compounders, because of the need and because of the physician's sort of direction of the importance for the patient, can make that medication without having to put that medication through any sort of FDA approval process. Now, compounders and so when I come back here and I say, there's a way around this sort of FDA approval process, there's a reason, and the reason is a good one, which is that people who need medications without specific additives that are generally in a commercial product need a medication that can be made a different way, and that's the need that compounders fill. What that means is it's based on what you need, and also the availability allows the compounders to get around some of the pre-market approval process for access to medications. This also allows access for experimental reasons. Say someone has a specific disease that there's no great treatment for. Here's a particular scenario which is sort of more commonly regarded as a reason for why this would be necessary. It's end of life. They really, were trying to either save life or ameliorate pain and suffering, and there's no commercial product, but we know that there's an experimental product that in this specific case might be beneficial, and everybody agrees to it. You can go to a compounder, have that pharmaceutical or product made, and have it get around the typical FDA approval process. Now, the FDA has some sort of regulatory authority because the compounders can only access ingredients which the FDA okays. So, although the FDA doesn't have direct say over what specific compounders can and can't make, they have absolute authority over what the original ingredients are that they can get, which ends up limiting what they can make. So I don't know if it's a fine line, but it's a means of control for the compounders. Compounders have an option to be regulated by the FDA, meaning they can register with the FDA for FDA 503A or B status, which means they then directly can be inspected by the FDA, and they have to adhere to all of the rules and regulations that the FDA sets forth for compounding pharmacies. But compounders are not generally regulated on a federal level. They're regulated at the state level by the state pharmacy board. So compounders in Colorado, their first sort of regulator is the state pharmacy board. The same way for doctors, and this confuses a lot of people, doctors are regulated at the state level by the state medical board. So the reason why this is really important is that the practice of medicine in Colorado can differ from the practice of medicine in another state, say California, Virginia, Texas, because of what the medical board will allow those practitioners to do. So really a good example of this is here in Colorado, you can go to a physical therapist. They'll do microneedling, they'll electrostim you. They have therapies that you go to New York, you go to Pennsylvania, you go to some other states where the medical board is a little bit more limited in what they'll allow physical therapists to do. You can't get microneedling in New York. You can't get microneedling from a physical therapist in Pennsylvania, but you can get it from a physical therapist here in Colorado. The same way, the medical board here is very open to biologic therapies and stem cell therapies. Go to Virginia, it's very difficult to find a provider who will do a stem cell or an ozone procedure because the medical board won't allow it. And so in the same fashion, the pharmacies are regulated on a state level. And so what the state pharmacy board allows their compounders to do can vary widely from state to state. So you can have a scenario where you have a compounding pharmacy that is regulated at the state level that the FDA has no direct regulatory authority over. And so in this scenario, and some of you might be here because you've heard about, well, the FDA they're trying to prevent, they're cracking down on peptides, and they're making it hard for people to make peptides. Well, the rules that the FDA puts forth, really it's the 503A and 503B compounding pharmacies that if they want to maintain their FDA affiliation and certification, they have to do what the FDA says. But not all compounders are FDA registered and regulated. A lot of compounders are just regulated by the state medical board. And what that means is they're limited by the ingredients they can get and what their state board of pharmacy will allow them to do. So for the time being, we're still able to get most peptides through a quality compounder, because of these reasons, and it's totally legal. So, how that would change would require a change in sort of the bills that dictate the regulation of the compounding pharmacies. But for the time being, we still have access to all these peptides. I guess with that, I'll launch into, we're almost done. There are websites where you can hop online and order peptides. And this is from one of those websites. What I'll put up here is that if you dive into the fine print, they'll say that these are for research and purposes only. And if you dive deeper into the fine print, they'll say these are for in vitro studies. What that means in lay language is it's for test tube use. So if you're doing a study in test tubes, this is what this product is supposed to be for. And they say that, introducing it into your body is actually like forbidden by law. And so you can get peptides at what used to be a steeper discount from a peptide that's made in a compounding pharmacy. But we generally don't recommend that you do that for those reasons. In general, we use peptide. Most of you are members, so we use peptides. We vet our compounders. In general, one of the things I want to say is, if you come to us for an injury and you need like a month of a peptide, we will sometimes do that. But in general, we're only prescribing peptides for our members, particularly because if you're going to do a peptide on a regular basis, or even if you're cycling on, we're going to want to be following your blood work. We want to follow your LFTs. We want to follow your kidney function. We want to follow your hormone levels. These are all things that should be checked periodically because of those sort of side effects and adverse reactions that can happen with any medication. And then finally, I guess that's the end of the talk, and we'll launch into Q&A, but I guess before we do that, I'm just going to make a plug for most of your members who already know this, but for those of you who aren't, this is how we work with people. We have sort of, in general, 3 different memberships levels: the Ascent, the Summit, the Executive. The Executive is really sort of the most complete health optimization package that I know that exists anywhere. And so we've looked at Mayo's executive health program. We've looked at the universities. We know the tests that they do. This is by far sort of the best health optimization diagnosis and treatment that you can get. Although most people work with us on sort of our regular membership plans. I'll highlight, with the Summit, we have what we consider to be, what I tell people is, it's very easy for me to do my job when I know exactly what your body wants. And the way we do that is through a set of testing, not just the regular biomarker testing, but micronutrient testing, heavy metal testing, gut microbiome testing, food sensitivity, liquid cancer biopsy screening, and early, heart cardiovascular screening. And so that's part of what we do in the Summit membership. Well, I guess the last thing I'll say there is if you sign up tonight, and we've hesitated to do this in the past, but we're changing. We have an eye on growth, and so I have to change how I do things. If you sign up tonight, you get the rest of the month free. You get 20% off any other service that you do over the course of the next month. And if you're interested, ask any of us, or Colleen will be ready to sign you up if you want to do that. And with that, we're done. So, yeah. Any questions?
How much of the peptide pushback from the FDA do you think is coming from big pharma and their ability not to want to be bypassed?
Well, I think it's the same. So if you've seen me talk about stem cells, I say the same thing, is that whenever you have something, I know we went over side effects and problems that people can have, but in general, peptides are exceedingly safe. Yeah. And it's because they're naturally occurring. And what you get in the vial when we order it from a compounder is synthetically made in a sterile lab and independently verified for purity and sterility. But it's a synthetic, so it's actually different fundamentally from what's naturally made in your body. So you can have, of course there's potential for reaction, but the risk is exceedingly low relative to something that your body's never seen before. And so these are safe. We went over 8, but there's hundreds of peptides that can be used for therapy. Whenever there's an issue around this, follow the money. And so how does that work? So in my opinion, this is how it might work, because I don't know exactly what's going on there. But here's, in my mind, how I sort of make sense of that is when you're looking at, so like semaglutide, for example, when you're looking at a unique patented product, is it better to have no competition or competition from the naturally occurring cousin? See what I'm saying? So I don't know what's in the pipeline, but what I would suspect is that there might be something in the pipeline that somebody doesn't want competition from a non-patented competitor from. That's sort of, now I don't know what that would be. I don't have inside knowledge, but how does it, like, why now? Like, why would they crack down on it? Because the safety issues, whatever safety issues there are less than what you get with a synthetic alternative or derivative. And therefore, why create an issue where there isn't one from a safety perspective? So that's why I say follow the money. You know, with stem cells, it's, you know, if you're going to have a patented stem cell product, you don't want competition from your stem cells. You know, if you want to compare a novel patented product and you have to compare that to the standard of care, which is your stem cells, you know, your stem cells might be better or it might be just as good as your stem cells, but you compare it to a steroid. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you eliminate this as a competitor, then the barrier to show improvement over existing therapies is much lower. So that's what I think is probably going on. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks all for coming.
Yeah.